July 19th, the much anticipated July 19th that's absolutely stacked from top to bottom all across the globe. Listen, we've got tons of fights going down, but you know what? The biggest, and you know what? It's tough because there's a bit of nostalgia. There's a few fights going down that are near and dear. However, the biggest fight in town is going down at Wembley, and that is for the undisputed heavyweight championship between Alexander Usyk and Daniel Dynamite Dubois. Can Daniel, who returns to the Lion's Den, but this time with somewhat home advantage.
UK, it's my second home. Sometimes when I'm in London, we go to barbershop. Yeah, this guy. Usyk.
You know, Usyk, this guy, his name is revered everywhere. This guy is a fan favorite, and I'm sure he's going to have a ton of fans in attendance. But Daniel is the hometown boy. The majority of his camp has been next door, right next door to Wembley. You've heard about, you know, Don Charles talking about every morning they see the arch, etc. Gives them the motivation and the drive and just the visualization of everything that they hope to achieve come Saturday night. So it is time, man. I can't wait. Oh my gosh. It's been interesting watching a lot of the pundits and just people in general go back and forth, trying to figure out how this is actually going to play out. And a long time ago, way back when, you know, Daniel invaded Usyk's post-fight victory against Tyson Fury, I predicted a victory for Alexander Usyk then. And you know what? I'm going to stick to my guns. I think that despite most of the, you know, presumptions that Daniel, being the younger, harder hitting puncher, will navigate him to victory, and there's a growing sense of, you know, expectation from the majority, particularly, you know, the British pundits and the British media, that Usyk, his time to age is now. He will age on the night, and Daniel's youth will take him across the finish line, and you know, Daniel will become the undisputed champion. If Daniel Dubois does pull this off, man, what are we talking about? We are talking about, if not the greatest British heavyweight to go down in history. What a way to kind of, you know, sweep aside, you know, the resumes and the accomplishments of both Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua, you know, in this current era. Because that would put Daniel Dubois at the top. Wow, crazy to think. And it is achievable. That being said, for Usyk to then become a two-time undisputed champion, we're talking about one of the greatest heavyweights ever, you know. And not only that, from this guy to do it at cruiserweight and then come up to heavyweight, just incredible stuff. And to beat the best heavyweights of this current generation, not once, but twice. So all the marbles are on the line Saturday night, and you can just understand why, you know, it's pulled out tons of a huge audience. There's tons of excitement going into this one. And I don't know, who is the favorite? Who is the favorite for you guys? Because it's pretty much, I'd say 60-40 to Usyk. And when I say favorite, who are you rooting for? I think there's a large number of people, you know, who have bought into the Daniel Dubois journey, you know, rightly so. We've seen this guy turn from a boy into a man, even though he's still only 27 years of age, which is frightening. So if he was to do, you know, the unthinkable, or for him, not really unthinkable, but if he was to pull this off, we're talking about a guy with tons of confidence and extremely dangerous and just really entering the peak of his powers. That being said, like I said, I'm going to stick to my guns. There's just an aura, particularly going into the last few days, an aura and air about Alexander Usyk, where this guy, everything that he's, and I know it's not necessarily politics, etc., whatnot, but this guy has his nation on his back, and he's been championing it all the way through. And even when you had fights against the likes of Joshua and Fury, and you know, the media were questioning them in terms of, you know, how do they feel about a man who's fighting while his country is at war, they tried to push the political narrative aside and focus on the boxing. But this guy, you know, you just get a sense it's very difficult to pick against him. Of course, father time comes for us all. However, what I will say is that Usyk is still very fresh. You know, you're looking at him, he's still very fresh, he's still very sharp. I get a sense of where, you know, his camp is, you know, and they've spoken about the science. There's a very scientific and a very calculated approach to his training, his, you know, regimen, his strength and conditioning. He's got a young, fresh team around him. Whereas if we make comparisons to the likes of an Artur Beterbiev, who Father Time seems to have caught up with him, you know, Usyk doesn't seem to display any of the damage that, you know, that people are expecting to show up on Saturday night. You know, there's a lot of talk about the two Tyson Fury fights and comparisons to Deontay Wilder, but Tyson Fury beat the brakes off Deontay Wilder. While they were two relatively closely contested fights, you know, I didn't see Usyk take necessarily too much damage from those two Fury fights. You know, he got off the better for sure, particularly off the first one where Fury was rocked to his boots. And even in the AJ fights, again, you know, he just seems to navigate and mitigate danger and get the decision or near victories or stoppages in the case of Tony Bellew, if you go back to cruiserweight. I think, again, the toughest fight that I do recall for Alexander Usyk was against Derek Chisora, and perhaps that's going to be the approach that, you know, Daniel Dubois is going to take into this fight, alongside the experience that he gained in the first fight. And I do believe they're going to go for the body again. Both men came in heavier this time around, a career heaviest for Alexander Usyk, which means that Usyk is not going to back up. He's going to try and hold the center of this ring, which he tends to do anyway. He's not going to try and be buoyed off by Dubois. Dubois is going to come in charged up, energetic, powerful, you know, as we saw in that Joshua display, and he's going to look to continue on and finish what he started. However, for Daniel Dubois, and one of the biggest things that I think that is going to come back to bite him for this one was not taking that Joseph Parker fight earlier in the year. You know, up until that point, Dubois had consecutive fights and a good string of momentum. He had, of course, the Filip Hrgović, Jarrell Miller, and then the Joshua fight, and they were relatively in quick succession. And this has been the longest spell. That, I believe, especially being that Joseph Parker would have been a test alongside, you know, the Andy Lee effect, the game plan, the strategy to go against, you know, someone who was at the peak of their powers. I still don't believe that he fought the best AJ. Well, that was evident to see, or a fit AJ in that respect. And while the destruction was fantastic, you know, it wasn't someone at the peak of their powers. Filip Hrgović, again, not someone at the peak of their powers. Jarrell Miller, you know, he's Jarrell Miller, but again, he, you know, after the drug allegations, etc., all that kind of turmoil that he was going up against, again, we saw a better Jarrell Miller in the Andy Ruiz fight, and he had just got to that point where he was getting into shape. So take nothing away from Dubois. The evolution has been fantastic, but we haven't seen him fight someone at the peak of their powers, and I believe that Joseph Parker would have shown us the level of where he's at. Now, Dubois goes in against someone who has beat him previously, stopped him with a jab, whether you attribute that to the psychological element or whatever, but he has got the victory over him. That potentially could surface itself in the fight should Dubois run out of ideas. But Dubois is fighting someone who is at the peak of their powers. And if you look at Usyk's last 5 fights, he's fought all elite level opposition. You know, he fought AJ when AJ was relatively at the peak of his powers. He fought Fury at the peak of his powers. And then he fought, didn't fight Dubois at his peak. Dubois' peak now, but, you know, Usyk has been consistent. And this is going to be the biggest test. And when it comes down to fighting at the highest and the elite level, as clear as day, there is none better at figuring out, making the adjustments than Alexander Usyk. And again, as I repeat, he's been able to do that on multiple occasions against, you know, the same opposition, even though they've had tape from the first fight to take into the second fight. And while some of them may have marginally improved, you know, he still finds a way. So that leads me to believe that Usyk will only go on to find a way to get it done, to cement himself as the greatest heavyweight to do it. So in terms of how this works out, I think Dubois is going to come on strong and aggressive in those early portions of the fight. And in doing so, you know, you're hearing about the sparring and everything. Everything about Dubois is going to be on the front foot. For that reason, I think we're going to get a stoppage again. As I mentioned to someone earlier that, you know, he did actually stop Dubois, whichever way you want to spin it. You know, he stopped Dubois in that first fight. So, you know, I can see him stopping Dubois again and using Dubois' own momentum against him. Like some people kind of like they downplay Usyk as not being a big puncher, but he rocked, like I said, he rocked Fury out of his boots. And, you know, I think if you don't respect his power, you're gonna be in for trouble. And the way I was seeing him in his camp and some of his shadowboxing and his training, he's really sitting down and throwing some things into these punches. So he's gonna be commanding some respect. Anyway, listen, there is no foregone conclusion, but I'm anticipating that it will be a stoppage between rounds 6 to 8 for Alexander Usyk. And hey, listen, we shall see. So place your bets. Moving on from that, listen, guys, tons of fights going on. The undercard, you've got Lawrence Okolie and David Lorena. I imagine Lawrence Okolie will come through out of this one. These guys have been eyeing up fighting each other for a while now, but now it goes down at heavyweight. And you know what? I think Lawrence Okolie is one to watch in this heavyweight division. So I'm expecting a stoppage from him on Saturday night. Moving across overseas, what have we got? We've got Jesse Bam Rodriguez. Man, another phenomenal talent against Phum Cafu. This is a tough fight. It's going to be a tough fight, but I'm going to give it a decision victory to Jesse Bam Rodriguez. That's my prediction for that one. We also have the return of Manny Pacquiao at 46 years of age, looking in phenomenal shape, I might add, man. Listen, and he takes on Mario Barrios for the WBC 147-pound championship. Mario Barrios assumed to be one of the weaker champions, and I guess that is the approach from Manny Pacquiao. But Manny Pacquiao is looking good. He's looking sharp. Power is the last thing to go. While Barrios has the height, the reach, and the youth, you would imagine he would get the job done, but never say never against the Pac-Man. I would love to see Manny Pacquiao do it. I'm not gonna lie. As wild as it is, it would be phenomenal to see. And there are the rumors of the return of Floyd, and we could get the rematch between Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao. And hey, listen, I'm all for it. Why not? So I'm gonna give Mario Barrios a decision victory against Manny Pacquiao. I think it goes the distance. On that card, we also have the rematch between Sebastian Fundora and Tim Tszyu. The first one was, you know, there was an unfortunate cut which turned into a massive bloodbath, and, you know, Fundora since then has gone from strength to strength. I imagine that Fundora just will be a bit too much again for Tim Tszyu. And then I believe that Tim Tszyu, he gets stopped by Fundora again. The last one was a stoppage by way of a cut. Oh, did it go the distance? I can't even remember. But I anticipate that this one is going to be a stoppage for Sebastian Fundora against Tim Tszyu. Finally, over to the UFC, man, stacked card again. The last dance, the final chapter between Max Holloway and Dustin Poirier. The Diamond's last dance, the final chapter of a trilogy for these two. And this is for the BMF title, well deserved. You know what? There are no winners and no losers between these guys. I just think it's going to be an all-round fantastic, entertaining fight. And I'm not even going to make a prediction. Actually, you know what? I'll make a prediction. I think the Diamond Dustin Poirier gets it done by way of decision or a stoppage in the last round. It's going to be an all-out war, and he bows out on a high. And man, listen, what a weekend of fights we have. So guys, anyway, I'll see you guys soon. Peace.